I didn't fight. Bryce delivered the news like he was reading numbers off a spreadsheet, voice steady, room faintly humming from the air vent above us. That's what stunned me. Before I say what I did next, I want you to be the jury. Comment one word right now. Fire if you think he's confident, or panic if you think he already knows he messed up. Restructuring, he said, hands folded, eyes already drifting toward his monitor, like the conversation was finished before it started. Look, when someone fires you after years of loyalty, you expect tension, maybe discomfort, maybe even a pause. There was none. He smiled. Not cruel. Not angry. Just efficient. We've identified someone who can modernize operations, he continued, tone flat, professional, the smell of burnt coffee hanging in the air between us. 60% of current compensation. Digital transformation. I didn't interrupt. Honestly, I was still waiting for him to say something human. Instead, he slid a folder toward me, without looking up. End of day. Documentation. Transition notes. Clean. Fast. The chair beneath me vibrated lightly as a forklift passed somewhere far below the office floor, a reminder that the system he was erasing was still running perfectly. He didn't notice. I nodded once. Not because I agreed, but because arguing would have meant pretending this was a discussion. It wasn't. This was a decision already made, rehearsed, approved in rooms I'd never been invited into. I stood. He didn't. As I reached for the door, I realized something sharp and unexpected, like cold metal against the tongue. He had no idea who he'd just fired. And that matters. Here's the test. Comment collapse if you think the system breaks without me, or fine if you think they'll be okay. Then watch what happens next. I'm not dramatic. I've spent most of my adult life solving problems quietly, the kind where success smells like nothing because nothing caught fire. That's always been enough for me. My name is Garrett Brooks. Quick question, and be real. Have you ever been the one who keeps everything running but gets treated like a line item? Comment, invisible, if that's you. I'm 49 years old, and I've been working since I was 17, long enough to learn that the people who keep things running rarely get introduced in meetings. That's not resentment. It's pattern recognition. I didn't grow up chasing applause. I grew up chasing steadiness, the low hum of predictability that lets you sleep through the night without checking your bank balance at 3 a.m. The thing is, you don't get that by being flashy. You get it by being early. By knowing which problems can wait until tomorrow, and which ones will rot overnight if you ignore them. By remembering details that don't fit neatly into reports. I've always worked that way. No speeches. No chest thumping. Just hands on the wheel. I like systems. Not because they're clean, but because they tell the truth if you pay attention. They creak, they resist, they push back when you try to force shortcuts, and they reward patience when you respect their limits. That's where I live. In the middle of complexity, where the air smells faintly of oil and dust, and the floor vibrates just enough to remind you something heavy is always moving nearby. That vibration has been my metronome for decades. I learned early that stability isn't passive. It's built, reinforced, checked, adjusted, then checked again when everyone else gets bored. Most people don't like that part. Honestly, I don't either. But I trust it. I've never been the loudest voice in the room. I'm the one people call when the noise stops and something's wrong. The one who answers without asking who's watching. That's why the conversation earlier didn't hit like an insult at first. It landed like a misunderstanding. Because when someone reduces your work to a number, it's not personal in the way people expect. It's conceptual. They've decided your way of thinking is obsolete. I walked back to my office with that thought sitting heavy in my chest, like swallowing something that doesn't go down clean. Not fear. Not anger. Clarity. I'd spent years making decisions that prevented disasters nobody ever saw. I'd absorbed stress so others could forget it existed. I'd made the complicated feel boring. And boring is dangerous, because boring gets labeled replaceable. I sat at my desk and listened to the building breathe. A distant clang echoed through the structure, metal on metal, followed by the soft hiss of compressed air releasing somewhere below. Everything was still working. That's the trap. When systems work, people assume they always will. They don't see the adjustments. They don't feel the tension you hold in your jaw when you know a supplier is lying and you're deciding whether to call them out now or wait until leverage shifts. They don't notice the way your shoulders tighten when seasonal demand creeps earlier than forecasts predicted. They just see silence. And they assume silence means simplicity. The thing is, silence is often the loudest proof that someone is paying attention. I realized then that this moment wasn't about losing a position. It was about losing invisibility. About what happens when the person holding the structure together steps aside, and the weight has nowhere to go. I didn't know yet where that weight would land. I just knew it wouldn't disappear. I stood up again, hands steady, heart slow, the faint taste of copper lingering at the back of my mouth from thinking too hard for too long. Whatever came next wasn't going to be loud, but it was going to be revealing. When I started there, nothing worked. The warehouse smelled like hot rubber, spilled coolant, and frustration that had been sitting too long with no place to go. People were busy, but nothing was moving. Parts were everywhere. Not organized wrong. Not labeled wrong. Just wrong, in ways that only show up when orders miss deadlines and suppliers start raising their voices. Forklifts idled longer than they should have. Radios crackled with the same questions on repeat. Where is this part? Who approved that shipment? Why is this sitting here? The previous logistics manager lasted 6 months. He said the place was impossible, said the variables were too many, said nobody had given him real authority. He wasn't stupid. He just didn't have the patience. I did. Not the heroic kind. The grinding kind. I started by watching. Standing on concrete floors long enough that my boots soaked in the cold, listening to how people talked when they were stressed versus when they were guessing. The difference matters. I learned suppliers the way you learn people. Who answered early. Who stalled. Who always promised Friday and meant Tuesday if you didn't push. You could hear it in their breathing over the phone, the way the line went quiet before a lie. Some parts couldn't sit in heat. Some chemical treatments reacted if stored too close together, sharp enough in the nose to warn you before the paperwork ever would. Winter components didn't belong in Arizona warehouses during summer unless you like returns and excuses. So I adjusted, then adjusted again. I built rotation patterns that followed seasons instead of calendars. I moved heavy brake assemblies closer to lifts that wouldn't throw out a worker's back at the end of a long shift. I spaced things the way people actually moved, not the way diagrams suggested they should. It wasn't elegant. It was effective. 3 years in, the noise dropped. Suppliers stopped calling angry. Then they started calling curious. How are you hitting these turnaround times? They asked. I didn't give speeches. I gave answers. After that, the system ran. Smooth enough that problems felt rare. Smooth enough that leadership stopped asking questions. Smooth enough that it looked like it took no effort at all. That's the danger zone. When complexity disappears, people assume it was never there. Bryce arrived during that calm. He never saw the mess. Never smelled the panic. Never felt the weight of a late shipment sitting in your chest at 2 a.m. He inherited silence and mistook it for simplicity. From his angle, it probably did look like dashboards ran everything. Like reports caused results. Like the building just knew what to do. But systems don't remember themselves. They don't correct quietly on instinct. They don't wake up early because a supplier's tone felt off yesterday. People do. Bryce showed up later. Not physically late, just after the hard parts had already been sanded down, when the air no longer smelled like panic, and nobody was raising their voice over radios anymore. He arrived to quiet. From where he stood, the place probably looked self-running. Monitors glowed. Charts refreshed. Numbers behaved. That's a seductive view. He never asked how the calm was maintained. He asked for dashboards. Real-time visibility, he'd say, tapping a screen, knuckles making a dull, hollow sound like knocking on a closed door. KPI alignment. Operational excellence. I gave him what he wanted. Reports. Slides. Clean lines that hid the friction underneath. The thing is, when you translate years of judgment into charts, it starts to look automatic. Bryce liked that. He'd smile in meetings and say, our automation basically runs itself now, and people would nod because nodding is easier than asking questions. Nobody likes being the one who slows things down. He never came to the floor. Never stood long enough on concrete to feel the vibration creep into his calves. Never noticed the way certain forklifts whined when they were overdue for maintenance or how a supplier's voice changed when they were about to miss a deadline. Those details didn't fit his model. And anything that doesn't fit gets labeled inefficient. Once, he asked why we kept buffer stock from a vendor that looked unreliable on paper. I started to explain the seasonal quirks, the weather patterns, the way their delays clustered after long weekends. He waved it off. The data doesn't show that, he said. And that was that. After a while, I stopped offering context. Not out of spite. Out of efficiency. If someone doesn't want to understand why something works, they usually don't want to hear what might break it. From his angle, I was expensive. A line item tied to processes that looked static, predictable, almost boring. He didn't see the constant adjustments because they happened before problems formed. That's the illusion. When prevention works, it looks like nothing. I remember standing in a conference room once while the projector fan whirred loudly behind us, Bryce walking through slides I'd built, explaining my systems like they were his ideas. He never said my name. I didn't correct him. Credit wasn't the point. Stability was. But stability doesn't impress people who measure progress by movement. And Bryce measured everything by what he could point to on a screen. That's when I realized we weren't speaking different languages. We were answering different questions. He wanted to know how things looked. I cared about how they held. And sooner or later, someone who confuses appearance for structure always finds out the difference. The folder was thin. Too thin for what he was asking, its cardboard edges dry against my fingertips as he slid it across the desk without looking up. That was the moment it stopped being theoretical. End of day, Bryce said. Not harsh. Not rushed. Just final. Document your processes. Transition responsibilities. Knowledge transfer. The thing is, those words sound reasonable if you've never had to live inside what they describe. They sound tidy, like something you could finish between meetings. I opened the folder anyway. The paper inside smelled faintly of fresh toner, still warm, like it had just come off a printer that believed this was all perfectly normal. There was a checklist. Supplier contacts. Inventory logic. Exception handling. Exception handling. I almost laughed. I walked back to my office and sat down. The chair creaked the way it always had, one screw, loose no matter how many times I tightened it, and I stared at the blank screen longer than I should have. Not because I didn't know what to write, because I knew it wouldn't matter. I started anyway. Names. Numbers. Lead times. Which vendors needed 3 weeks no matter what they promised, which ones panicked if you didn't call before lunch, which ones only told the truth after you let the line go quiet long enough. I wrote about storage. Temperature tolerances. Spacing. Why certain pallets never touched certain zones even though the map said they could. The keyboard clacked steadily, a dry rhythm that matched the distant beep of forklifts below, and 6 pages in my wrists started to ache. Not from typing. From compressing. You can't explain judgment in bullet points. You can't footnote instinct. You can't hyperlink the feeling you get when a supplier says, "No problem," too quickly. Around 2, Bryce walked past my door. "How's it coming?" he asked, already glancing at his phone. "It's coming," I said. He nodded and kept moving. That's when it hit me. He genuinely believed this was transferable. He'd spent months telling people the system was streamlined, that it ran itself, that automation had eliminated complexity. Now he wanted proof. So I gave him the version that fit his story. The clean version. The one that looked complete while missing everything that mattered. By 4 I stopped. Not because I was done, but because continuing felt dishonest. I packed my things slowly. Cardboard scraping softly against the floor, tape ripping with that sharp sound that always feels louder in quiet rooms. A mug. A jacket. A few photos. No one stopped by. No one asked questions. That's how you know a decision has already been normalized. People adapt faster than you expect when their own stability is on the line. As I carried the box out, the building sounded the same as it always had. Motors humming. Radios crackling. Everything still working. From the outside, it probably looked like nothing had changed. And that was the point. If something can be documented in an afternoon, it must not have been very valuable. At least, that's what Bryce needed to believe. He didn't understand that the most dangerous systems are the ones that look finished. I didn't announce it. I taped the box shut, the adhesive peeling loud and sharp in the quiet, and stood there for a second longer than necessary. That pause mattered. People think exits are loud. They imagine doors slamming, words thrown, voices rising, but most real endings happen while everyone else keeps working, the air unchanged, the routine uninterrupted. This was one of those. I carried the box down the hallway. The floor felt colder near the loading area, a chill that seeped through the soles of my shoes, and the smell shifted from paper and dust to oil and metal. Familiar, almost comforting. A forklift passed me. The driver nodded, quick and automatic, eyes already back on his route. He didn't know. Or maybe he did and didn't want to. That's how places like this function. News moves fast, but acknowledgement moves slow. Everyone has rent. Everyone has kids. Everyone has reasons to keep their head down. I didn't blame them. I'd done the same thing once a long time ago. When I reached the exit, I stopped again. The door handle was cool, smooth, worn from thousands of hands pulling it open without thinking. I thought about how many times I'd walked through it carrying nothing but a clipboard, already planning fixes before I reached the parking lot. This time I had a box. And no plan. Outside, the air felt heavier. Not dramatic, just different, like stepping out of a climate-controlled room into something less predictable. My truck sat where it always did. I put the box in the back seat. It slid against the upholstery with a soft thud, final in a way that paperwork never is. I sat behind the wheel and didn't start the engine. For the first time in years, nobody needed anything from me. No radio call. No missed delivery. No supplier checking excuses. The silence wasn't peaceful. It buzzed faintly, the way your ears ring after a loud room empties out. I realized I'd been holding tension so long I didn't know what to do without it. I started the truck. The engine turned over rough for a second, then settled into a steady idle, a low vibration through the seat that reminded me how much I relied on things that worked when you turned the key. As I pulled out of the lot, the building stayed exactly the same. No alarms. No confusion. No visible cracks. That's the lie of a clean exit. From the outside, it looks like continuity. But I knew something had shifted. Not yet. Not loudly. Just enough that the weight had moved, and whatever was holding it up next hadn't realized it yet. I drove home. The house was lit. Every window glowed, warm and ordinary, and for a second I sat in the driveway listening to the engine tick as it cooled, that faint metallic clicking counting down something I didn't want to name yet. Inside, life was happening without me. I walked in. The smell of onions and soap mixed in the kitchen, the low whir of the dishwasher pulsing like a heartbeat, and Stephanie looked up from a table before I said a word. She always knew. "What's wrong?" she asked. Not panicked. Just direct. "I got fired today," I said. No build-up. No softening. The room went quiet in a way that had weight. Colin stood in the doorway with a calculus book tucked under his arm, Lance behind him holding his guitar by the neck like he wasn't sure where to put it. They were already doing the math. Stephanie crossed the room and hugged me. She didn't ask how or why, just pressed her forehead into my shoulder, her grip firm enough to steady both of us. The thing is, when someone doesn't flinch, it gives you permission not to either. "Okay," she said after a moment. We separated, and she leaned back against the counter, eyes focused but calm. "What happened?" "They said they found someone cheaper," I said. "Called it digital transformation." Colin's jaw tightened. "That's insane," he said. "You built that whole operation." Lance didn't say anything at first. He set the guitar down carefully, like sudden movements might break something, then asked, "What about college?" His voice was quiet, but landed harder than anything else. Stephanie answered before I could. "We'll figure it out," she said, already organizing possibilities in her head the way she always did, commission cycles and savings and what could wait. She glanced at me. "Did they mention severance?" "No," I said. The word fell thin. We sat. The chair legs scraped softly against tile as everyone found a place, and the dishwasher clicked into a new cycle, louder than it needed to be. Normal sounds suddenly sharp. "I'll start looking tomorrow," I said. Not a promise. A reflex. That night, sleep didn't come. The ceiling fan made a faint wobbling noise every few rotations, and Stephanie lay beside me, still, not asking questions, just there. Worry has a way of traveling through mattresses. Sometime before morning, I thought about Dean. Not as a solution. Just as a name that surfaced when I replayed the last decade, honestly. Dean Patterson had been VP of Operations for as long as I could remember. We weren't close, but years ago, during a supplier crisis, I'd found alternatives in 4 hours and saved the company a 6-figure hit. He'd called me personally afterward. Since then, we'd grabbed lunch every few months. Nothing fancy. Burgers late afternoons, conversations that wandered from logistics to family to whatever problem was keeping him up that week. He listened. We had lunch scheduled for Friday. 4:30. Same place. I checked the time. 4:15. For a moment, I considered canceling. It felt awkward, showing up unemployed, explaining something I didn't fully understand yet. Then I thought about how often I'd fix things by showing up anyway. I got dressed. The fabric of my shirt felt stiff, like it always did when I hadn't worn it in a while, and I grabbed my keys without telling Stephanie where I was going. She watched me from the doorway and nodded once. "Call me," she said. I promised I would. The drive took 15 minutes. Industrial traffic, familiar turns, the same route I'd taken dozens of times for those lunches. I wasn't angry. I was empty. I was 5 minutes out. The road hummed under the tires, that steady vibration you only notice when your thoughts go quiet, and the radio stayed off because noise felt unnecessary. I was rehearsing explanations I didn't want to give. My phone buzzed. Once. Then again. Dean's name lit up the screen. I let it ring the first time, figured I'd explain everything in person, sitting across from him like we always did, grease-stained napkins and bad coffee between us. The phone buzzed again. By the fourth call, I answered. "Where are you?" he asked, and there was an edge in his voice I'd never heard before, sharp enough to cut through whatever numbness I was carrying. "Almost there," I said. "What's going on?" "We have the quarterly logistics review in 20 minutes, he said. "Your manager keeps saying you're unavailable. You're listed as presenter. What's happening?" The words hit slow. Not panic. "Wait." "I didn't quit," I said. I could hear my own voice steady through the speaker. "Bryce fired me this morning." Silence. Not dead air. Breathing. "He what?" Dean said. 2 words. "Flat." "He told me they'd found someone cheaper," I said. "Asked me to document everything and leave." I pulled into the restaurant parking lot and stopped the car. Engines idled nearby, a delivery truck rattling as it backed up somewhere close, but all felt far away. "I'm looking at the agenda," Dean said. "You're on it. Operational efficiency report. Supplier performance. Distribution optimization. You've done this every quarter." "I know," I said. "I was planning to be there." More silence. Then his voice changed. Colder. "Stay near your phone," he said. And the line went dead. I sat there. Hands on the steering wheel, phone warm against my palm, the faint smell of exhaust drifting through a cracked window. Around me, people walked into the restaurant, laughing, checking watches, living inside a normal Friday afternoon. For everyone else, nothing was wrong. For me, something was moving, quietly, somewhere above my head. The phone buzzed again. A text this time. "What's your manager's direct extension?" I sent it. No explanation. Just the number. Then I waited. The waiting stretched. Not the dramatic kind, just long enough for your thoughts to start pacing, bumping into each other like boxes on a conveyor that's suddenly stopped. I stayed in the truck. Minutes passed. The engine was off now, but heat lingered, that faint baked smell of plastic and dust that settles when a vehicle's been running too long in one place. I cracked the window another inch. My phone stayed quiet. Too quiet. I tried not to imagine what was happening on the other end of that extension I'd sent. Dean calling Bryce. Bryce smiling at first, confident, rehearsed. Then confusion. Then questions he hadn't prepared answers for. I didn't picture yelling. Dean wasn't the type. He was the kind who let silence do the work. The kind who asked one precise question and waited while you talk yourself into trouble. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Hello," I said. "Garrett Brooks," a woman asked. Her voice was neutral, professional, the sound of someone already typing while she spoke. "Yes." "This is Nicole from Human Resources," she said. "I'm calling about a termination process today under your employee number. I just need to confirm a few details." I leaned back. The seat fabric was warm against my shoulders, and somewhere nearby a delivery truck let out a short blast of air brakes, sharp and sudden. "Okay. Did you meet with Bryce Hamilton this morning?" she asked. "Yes." "And he informed you of termination effective immediately?" "Yes." "Did he provide severance documentation or formal exit procedures?" "No," I said. The word felt heavier than it should have. There was a pause. "Typing. A lot of it. Did he cite performance issues?" she asked. "Any disciplinary record?" "No," I said. "He said they'd found someone cheaper. Called it digital transformation." More typing. Longer this time. I watched a couple walk past my truck, arguing softly about where to eat, their voices muffled through glass. Normal problems. I envied them. "I see," Nicole said finally. Her tone didn't change, but something slowed underneath it. "And you were instructed to leave the premises today?" "Yes." "Thank you," she said. "Someone will be in touch." The call ended. No reassurance. No apology. But the air felt different, like pressure shifting before weather changes. I sat there longer than I meant to. The radio crackled to life from another car pulling in, bass vibrating faintly through the pavement, and for the first time since that morning, I felt something besides emptiness. Not hope. Awareness. 2 hours passed. I drove home without remembering the drive, autopilot taking over the way it does when you've traveled the same roads too many times to count. Then my phone rang again. Bryce. I almost didn't answer. Curiosity won. "Garrett," he said, and the confidence was gone. His voice sounded thinner, like it was being pulled through something narrow. "There's been a miscommunication," he said. "We need you back immediately." I didn't respond. The silence stretched, and I could hear him breathing now, shallow, uneven. "There was a procedural issue," he continued. "HR flagged it. Your termination wasn't properly authorized through the correct channels." I waited. "We value your expertise," he said. "You're critical to operations." Critical. He'd never used that word about me before. "The VP needs the quarterly logistics reports," Bryce added quickly. "For Monday. You have all the data. Nobody else can generate the analysis in time. Nobody else." Because he'd fired the person who understood what the numbers meant. "I'll think about it," I said. "Garrett, please," he said. The word landed wrong. "Too late. We have corporate obligations," he went on. "The review affects regional planning, budget allocations, head count." "You didn't seem worried about that this morning," I said. "I made an error in judgment," he said. "But we can fix this. Come back. We'll discuss compensation adjustments. Expanded responsibilities." I closed my eyes. The hum of the refrigerator drifted in from the kitchen, steady and indifferent. I hung up. No goodbye. For the first time since I'd walked out with that box, I smiled. Not wide. Not smug. Just enough to feel it. That night, I told Stephanie everything. Dean's call. HR, Bryce's voice cracking. She listened without interrupting, nodding slowly, absorbing it the way she always did when something big was still unfolding. "So what are you going to do?" she asked. "I'm not going back," I said. "Not angry. Certain." She exhaled. "I think that's right," she said. "We'll adjust." The boys took it better than I expected. Colin started looking up work-study programs without being asked. Lance said, "I'm proud of you," and meant it. Monday came. Bryce called 6 times before noon. I didn't answer. Monday didn't explode. It unraveled. I woke up early out of habit, the kind that doesn't disappear just because the job does, and lay there listening to the house settle, pipes ticking softly as hot water moved through them. For years, mornings meant problems waiting. That morning, there was nothing scheduled. At 9, my phone rang. I let it go. 10 minutes later, it rang again. Different number. I answered that one. "Garrett," a man said, breathless. "This is Troy from the Detroit Center." I knew Troy. Good manager. Careful. Not prone to panic. "We got a shipment of transmission parts that was supposed to go to Ford this morning," he said. "And nobody knows where they're staged." I closed my eyes. I could hear forklifts in the background through the phone, engines idling longer than they should, radios chirping over each other. "Zone 12, I said. Climate-controlled section. Blue tags. Top rack, second row." Silence. Then movement. "Jesus," Troy said. "He's been searching Zone 7 for 3 hours." "Who's he?" I asked, even though I already knew. "The new guy," Troy said. "He said the system showed Zone 7. "It always does," I said. "For that skew. The system's wrong." A pause. "Thanks," Troy said and hung up. I sat there for a moment, phone still warm in my hand, the faint smell of toast drifting in from a kitchen. One call didn't mean anything. It could have been coincidence. Then the phone rang again. Different center. Different problem. A supplier delivery showed up wrong. Brake components nobody ordered, sitting on a dock with no return authorization. The receiving clerk didn't know who to call. I walked them through it. Who to contact. What code to use. Which paperwork to ignore. Another call came in before I could set the phone down. Then another. Each one sounded the same. Confusion layered on urgency, voices tighter than they should have been before noon. By lunchtime, the pattern was clear. Nothing catastrophic yet. Just dozens of small failures stacking quietly, the kind that don't trigger alarms until they start feeding each other. Bryce called again. This time I answered. "Everything's chaos," he said, skipping pleasantries entirely. "Nothing's where the system says it should be. Suppliers are calling nonstop." I didn't respond. "The replacement quit," he added. "After 1 day. Said the job was completely different than described." I leaned back in the chair. The wood creaked under my weight, familiar, grounding. "What did you describe?" I asked. "Basic inventory tracking," Bryce said. "Data entry. Process oversight." "You made it look easy," I said. He didn't argue. That silence was new. "I didn't realize it was this complex," he said finally. "I thought." "You thought the dashboards were the work," I said. "The dashboards were the receipt." He inhaled sharply. "Come back," he said. Name your salary. I looked at the wall clock. The second hand moved steadily, unconcerned. No, I said. There was a sound on the line then. Not a word. Just a small, involuntary noise, like air leaving something punctured. Garrett, he said. Corporate is demanding full operational analysis. Supplier performance metrics. Distribution efficiency. Cost optimization. You should have learned how that worked when you had the chance, I said. I hung up. The calls didn't stop. I started letting some go unanswered. Not out of spite. Out of necessity. I helped enough to keep people safe. Enough to stop forklifts from hunting blind. Enough to prevent perishable components from degrading in the wrong zones. But I didn't rebuild anything. I didn't stabilize the system. That wasn't my job anymore. By Wednesday, the strain was audible. Suppliers called angry now, voices sharp, accusing. Orders missed. Contracts threatened. By Thursday, rumors filtered through old contacts. Parts shipped to the wrong dealers. Critical components sitting too long in heat. I could picture it. The slow creep of disorder, the way one missed adjustment leads to another until people start reacting instead of anticipating. Dean called once that week. You okay? He asked. Yeah, I said. Looking for work. Good, he said. I know operations are struggling, but Bryce needs to understand what he discarded. What if he doesn't? I asked. Then we make other arrangements, Dean said. But that's not your concern anymore. He was right. On Friday afternoon, I turned my phone off for 2 hours. Just to see what it felt like. The silence was unsettling at first, like stepping off a moving walkway and realizing your legs forgot how to adjust. Then it was quiet. When I turned the phone back on, there were 14 missed calls. I didn't listen to the voicemails, because by then I understood something I hadn't before. The system wasn't failing because I left. It was failing because it had been mistaken for something that didn't need a person behind it. And now, without that person, it was finally being heard. The quiet that weekend felt heavier than the chaos. Not empty, just dense, like air before a storm that never quite breaks. I spent Saturday morning at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that went cold before I remembered to drink it. Stephanie sat across from me. Legal pads out. Pen moving. She wasn't panicking. She was planning. The commissions from last month will cover the next few weeks, she said, tapping numbers into a calculator, the buttons clicking softly. If I pick up 2 more showings, we're okay through mid-semester. I watched her work. The smell of coffee had turned bitter, and the refrigerator kicked on with a low groan, like it was tired too. This was what partnership looked like when the ground shifted. I could go back, I said. Not because I wanted to, because the option existed. She stopped writing. Looked at me the way she does when she's waiting for me to finish a thought I haven't said out loud yet. Do you want to? She asked. That was the question. Not salary. Not title. Not leverage. Do you want to? I thought about Bryce's voice on the phone. The way it tightened when he said the word critical. The way urgency suddenly replaced confidence once the system stopped behaving. I don't trust him, I said. The words came out clean. Stephanie nodded. Not surprised. Not disappointed. Then don't, she said. We'll adjust. We always do. Later that afternoon, Colin came in with his laptop. Didn't make a big deal of it. I found some work-study options, he said. Nothing fancy, but it helps. Lance followed, quieter, carrying the same guitar he'd been holding the night I told them. He set it down and said, I'm proud of you. Just that. That settled it. Sometimes decisions get made not by logic, but by alignment. Monday morning, I woke up early again. Old habits. The house smelled like toast and soap, ordinary things anchoring me while my phone sat face down on the counter. I didn't turn it over. Not yet. I went for a walk instead. Cold air bit at my cheeks, sharp and honest, and the pavement under my shoes felt uneven in a way I hadn't noticed before. When you're always rushing, you miss texture. By the time I got back, there were messages. Voicemails stacked like unread reports. I listened to one. Bryce again. His voice was hoarse now. No pitch. No polish. I know I was wrong, he said. I didn't understand what you did. I thought it was just managing spreadsheets. There it was. The sentence that explained everything. If you come back, he continued, we'll do whatever it takes. Consulting. Interim. Anything. Anything except understanding sooner. Anything except respect before necessity. I deleted the message. Then blocked the number. Not out of anger. Out of closure. That afternoon, I started applying for positions. Not everywhere. Not urgently. I was selective in a way I'd never allowed myself to be before. I read job descriptions slowly, the way you read fine print after you've been burned once. Most wanted speed. Immediate starts. Quick fixes. I skipped those. 3 interviews came together that week. One with a regional competitor. One with a manufacturer expanding distribution. One with an automotive supplier building their logistics from scratch. The last one felt different. Jennifer Martinez, the CEO, met me in the lobby herself. No assistant. No rush. We walked the floor together. She asked questions, then waited for answers. Not just what systems I'd built, but why. What I'd do differently if I had to start over. Where I'd expect friction before growth. I talked. Honestly. I told her it wouldn't be fast. That there would be mistakes. That logistics isn't software you install, it's a discipline you develop. She nodded the whole time. Not because she agreed with everything, but because she was listening. That's exactly why we want you, she said. We've seen what happens when companies think this is plug and play. I drove home with the windows down. Cold air filled the car, clean and bracing, and for the first time since that morning in Bryce's office, I felt something settle. Not relief. Direction. That night, Stephanie asked how it went. I told her. She smiled. The real one. The relaxed one. When would they need an answer? She asked. They said to take my time, I said. I didn't need it. Some decisions feel heavy. This one felt aligned. I went to bed that night and slept straight through. No ceiling fan counting rotations. No replaying conversations. Just rest. The next morning, I called Jennifer. Told her I was in. And as I hung up, I realized something simple and overdue. Walking away hadn't cost me leverage. It had given me back my voice. My first day didn't start with a meeting. It started with a walk. Jennifer met me in the lobby, not behind a desk, not glancing at her phone, just standing there with a visitor badge already printed, paper warm from the machine. Let's see the place, she said. We moved slowly. The floor echoed under our steps, a hollow sound that changed pitch from one section to the next, and the air carried that mixed scent of cardboard, lubricant, and fresh paint that only new operations have. Not chaos. Potential. She didn't explain. She asked, what do you notice? What feels tight? What would break first if volume doubled? I answered honestly. Not with solutions. With observations. This pallet flow is going to bottleneck in winter. That supplier's lead times look fine on paper, but the spacing tells me they rush. Your team's working hard, but they're compensating for gaps instead of systems. Jennifer listened without interrupting. That alone changed everything. Most places want answers on day one. She wanted understanding. We stopped near receiving. A forklift beeped twice as it reversed, sharp and insistent, and the operator gave us a quick nod. Not nervous, not guarded. Just working. What do you need to be successful here? Jennifer asked. I didn't hedge. Time, I said. Time to learn your products, your suppliers, the ways people move when nobody's watching. She smiled. Good, she said. That's exactly why we hired you. No urgency theater. No speeches about disruption. Just permission. The first week, I didn't change anything. That made some people uneasy. I could feel it in the way conversations paused when I walked by, the way questions came wrapped in expectations. When do we start fixing things? What's the plan? There is one, I'd say. Later. Instead, I watched. I listened to radios at shift change, the subtle change in tone when pressure built. I stood long enough on the floor that the vibrations settled into my legs and told me where weight naturally wanted to go. I learned names, not titles. Names. I asked why things were done a certain way and paid attention to the hesitation before the answer. That pause usually meant history. By week 2, patterns emerged. Not failures. Habits. People worked around inefficiencies with grit. Smart people, compensating quietly, filling gaps with memory and effort. That works until it doesn't. I started sketching. Not diagrams. Mental maps. Where decisions actually happened. Where information slowed. Where one person carried too much without realizing it. Jennifer checked in every Friday. 10 minutes. No agenda. How's it feeling? What's heavier than it should be? What can I move out of your way? That question mattered. It meant she understood her role. By the end of the first month, I made my first change. Small. We moved one high-volume component closer to outbound lanes, nothing flashy, but the effect was immediate. Fewer steps. Fewer mistakes. Less noise. People noticed. Not because I announced it. because their shifts ended calmer. The second change came a week later. Then another. Each one earned. Each one explained. I didn't roll out a system. I built one with them. By the third month, suppliers started calling me directly. Not complaining. Asking, how should we stage this? When do you want us to adjust? Trust doesn't announce itself. It shows up early and stays late. Jennifer called me into her office one afternoon. No tension. Just curiosity. You know, she said, I've run companies where people move fast and break things. She paused. This feels different. It is, I said. Nothing's broken yet. She laughed, the kind that carries relief. By month 4, we were stable enough to grow. That's when the real work started. We hired carefully. Not for speed. For thinking. One of them was Shane. 26. Engineering degree. Eyes that stayed on problems instead of drifting to phones. He asked why a lot. Not to challenge. To understand. I took him under my wing without calling it that. Showed him how parts flowed, how suppliers signaled trouble without saying it, how small adjustments early save days later. He made mistakes. We fixed them together. That's how knowledge transfers. Not in documents. In moments. Around that time, stories from my old job filtered back. I didn't seek them out. Suppliers frustrated. Managers stretched thin. Processes rewritten by people who'd never lived inside them. Dean called once. Just once. How's the new place treating you, he asked. Better, I said. And I meant it. Good, he said. You deserve that. We didn't talk about Bryce. We didn't need to. By the end of the year, Jennifer asked me to oversee a second facility. Ohio. From the ground up, she said, with time to do it right. I didn't hesitate. This was the work. Building the Ohio operation felt like breathing. Every decision informed by what I'd learned before, every mistake anticipated instead of reacted to. Shane took over day-to-day at the first site. Handled it well. That's what success looks like when you plan for it. Not dependence. Continuity. One evening, months later, I stayed late, walking the floor alone. The building hummed softly, machines settling, the smell of clean cardboard and oil lingering without edge. Everything held. I thought about that thin folder Bryce slid across his desk, about how much he believed could fit inside it. I smiled. Not out of spite. Out of certainty. Some things can't be rushed. Some systems don't run themselves. And when you finally work somewhere that understands that, the work stops feeling like survival. It starts feeling like craft. The call came on a Tuesday. Mid-afternoon, quiet hour, the kind where work slows just enough to hear yourself think. My phone buzzed once, unfamiliar number. I almost let it go. Old habits die hard, but new boundaries form faster than you expect when you've earned them. I answered anyway. Garrett, a voice asked. There was hesitation in it, a carefulness that told me this wasn't a sales call. This is him, I said. It's Lance Rodriguez, the voice continued. I don't know if you remember me. I worked receiving. Zone 5. Back at Midwest. I did remember. Not his name at first, but the moment came back all at once, like muscle memory. A loading dock. A mistake. Panic held together with duct tape and fear. Yeah, I said. I remember. He exhaled. Not relief. Nerves. I'm calling because I'm leaving next week, he said. Found something better. And I wanted to thank you before I go. For what? I asked. There was a pause. I could hear movement on his end, a faint echo like he'd stepped into a stairwell or an empty hallway. For years ago, he said slowly, I mixed up 2 major shipments. Transmission parts. Cost thousands. I thought I was done. I leaned back in my chair. The room smelled faintly of paper and fresh paint, the new place still settling into itself. You found me, Lance continued. I was losing it. Couldn't breathe right. You didn't yell. You didn't call anyone. You just said, okay, let's fix it. I remember that part now. Staying late. Sorting. Rerouting. Filing the report myself. You stayed 3 hours after your shift, he said. And you never told anyone it was my fault. You put your name on the paperwork. I swallowed. At the time, it hadn't felt like a decision. Just the obvious thing to do. I needed you to know, Lance said. When they fired you, a lot of us felt sick about it. Not because we were surprised. Because if they could do that to you, then none of us mattered either. The words landed heavier than I expected. Not painful. Clarifying. I'm not the only one leaving, he added. A lot of people have, or are trying to. Because the place changed when you left. Not the systems. The feeling. We sat in silence for a moment. On my end, a forklift beeped in the distance, controlled, precise, the sound clean instead of frantic. "Thanks for calling," I said finally. "You didn't have to." "I know," he said. "I wanted to." The line went dead. I stayed there longer than necessary, phone resting warm against my palm, like it was still holding something. That wasn't the last call. Over the next few weeks, others reached out. People I hadn't thought about in years. A supervisor who said morale had dropped the moment leadership decided experience was optional. A planner who admitted she'd been covering gaps she didn't understand, hoping nobody noticed. A driver who said the routes stopped making sense once the person who designed them stopped answering his calls. Jennifer mentioned it one afternoon, casual, like she was sharing a weather update. "You know we've hired 6 people from your old company this year," she said. "They all say the same thing." "What's that?" I asked. "That you showed them how work was supposed to feel," she said. "Clear. Fair. Steady." I didn't know what to do with that. Praise always made me uncomfortable. But later, walking the floor alone, it settled in. I'd thought my job had been logistics. Moving parts. Managing flow. Preventing friction. What I'd actually been doing was setting a standard. One I never announced. People noticed how I handled pressure. How I took responsibility. How I treated mistakes as problems to solve, not failures to punish. When the company stopped meeting that standard, people didn't argue. They left. That was the ripple Bryce never saw. Not the dashboards. Not the missed shipments. The erosion of trust. Months later, Dean called again. He sounded tired. "Turnover's been rough," he said. "Hard to keep good people." I didn't say anything. "You built more than a system here," he added. "You built expectations." We didn't dwell on it. There was nothing to fix. That night, I drove home with the windows down, cool air filling the car, carrying the faint smell of rain on pavement. I thought about how close I'd come to staying somewhere that needed me, but didn't value me. I thought about that thin folder. About how much it tried to contain. Leadership, I realized, is invisibility. It's residue. It's what stays behind when you leave a room. When you leave a job. When you're gone, and people still know how to act. I didn't set out to be that person. I just showed up the same way every day. And in the end, that mattered more than any title ever could. The change didn't announce itself. It arrived quietly, like a muscle relaxing after being clenched for years, and I only noticed it when something didn't hurt anymore. That's how you know you've been carrying too much for too long. It started with mornings. I still woke early, but not with that tight pull in my chest, not with the mental inventory of problems lining up before my feet hit the floor. The house sounded the same, pipes ticking, floorboards creaking, but my body felt different inside it. Lighter. Workdays settled into a rhythm that didn't demand vigilance every second. I still paid attention. That part never leaves you. But attention stopped feeling like defense. At the new facility, people solved things without waiting for permission. Not recklessly. Confidently. They'd ask questions, argue respectfully, then decide, and move. When a mistake happened, it was addressed, not hidden. That matters more than people realize. One afternoon, a shipment arrived early and threw off the dock schedule. A year ago, that would have triggered 3 calls, 2 emails, and quiet panic about blame. Here, someone adjusted the flow, flagged the change, and we moved on. No drama. No residue. I noticed it physically. My shoulders sat lower. The dull ache at the base of my neck that I'd blamed on age started to fade, like a sound you stop hearing once it's gone. Stephanie noticed too. She said it one night while we were doing dishes, water running warm over our hands, steam fogging the window above the sink. "You're not bracing anymore," she said. "For what?" I asked. "For work," she said. "For being questioned." She was right. I hadn't realized how much of my energy had gone into justifying decisions that already worked, explaining expertise to people who didn't want to learn it. That constant readiness to defend drains you. Slowly, quietly, the boys noticed in their own way. Colin stopped checking on me every few days, not out of distance, but because he didn't need to. Lance started leaving his guitar in common spaces again, playing without headphones, relaxed enough to be heard. Those are small tells. They matter. At work, Jennifer never hovered. She checked in, asked real questions, then stepped back. That space let everyone else step forward. I saw it in Shane. He'd started anticipating issues on his own, bringing me solutions instead of problems, testing ideas before asking permission. That's what trust does. Not blind trust. Earned trust. There was a moment one afternoon that crystallized it for me. We were reviewing expansion plans, timelines stretching out across the conference table, and someone suggested accelerating phase 2 to impress investors. The room went quiet. Eyes shifted toward me. I didn't rush to answer. I listened. Speed won't break us, I said finally, but shortcuts will. Nobody argued. Not because I was in charge, but because the logic was familiar. It matched the way we'd been working all along. After the meeting, Shane walked with me back to the floor. The concrete vibrated lightly underfoot, forklifts moving with practiced ease, the air carrying that steady, neutral smell of cardboard and oil. "Thanks for saying that," he said. I was thinking the same thing. That's when it hit me. I wasn't holding the structure up anymore. It was holding itself. That weekend, I didn't check my email. Not as an act of rebellion. Just because I didn't need to. We went out to dinner. Nothing fancy. A place with worn menus and uneven tables, the smell of grilled meat hanging heavy in the air. We talked about ordinary things. Plans. Classes. A trip we might take next year. Normal felt earned. Driving home, windows down, cool air washing through the car, I thought about how close I'd come to accepting Bryce's offer. To stepping back into a role where being needed had replaced being respected. Needing someone isn't the same as valuing them. I understand that now. The weight I'd been carrying wasn't the work. It was the constant pressure of proving my worth to people who'd already decided it was negotiable. Letting that go didn't make me softer. It made me sharper. I still work hard. I still care deeply. But the effort goes into building, not defending. That's the difference. And once you feel it, really feel it, there's no going back. I used to think work gave you security. That if you stayed long enough, fixed enough problems, absorbed enough stress quietly, stability would eventually harden around you like concrete. I know better now. What work really gives you is a mirror. It shows you what you're willing to tolerate, what you excuse, and how long you'll keep carrying weight that isn't yours because someone else finds it convenient. I didn't see that while I was inside it. When you're in the middle of something, you normalize the strain. You tell yourself everyone feels this way, that it's just how responsibility works. But responsibility isn't supposed to feel like erosion. At my old job, I told myself the exhaustion meant I mattered. That being the last line of defense was proof of value. The thing is, being needed and being respected are not the same currency. I can feel the difference now in my body. That sounds dramatic, but it's practical. Before, my jaw stayed tight without me noticing. I chewed through headaches. I woke up already tired, already braced for conversations that hadn't happened yet. Now, when a problem comes up, it arrives clean. It stays contained. It doesn't leak into dinner, into sleep, into the space between sentences at home. That's not because the work is easier. It's because the work is honest. At the new place, effort is visible but not theatrical. No one confuses urgency with importance. No one mistakes noise for progress. People say what they don't know. That alone changes everything. I watch teams pause before decisions, not because they're afraid, but because they're thinking. I hear disagreement without heat. I see mistakes named early, while they're still small enough to fix. That's culture. Not posters. Not slogans. I didn't build it alone. I couldn't have. It only works because leadership doesn't interfere when things are working. Because trust is extended first and verified later. Because nobody needs to make someone else look small to feel large. I think about Bryce sometimes. Not with anger. With clarity. He wasn't malicious. He just believed in appearances more than structure. And that belief cost him more than he understood. I used to think my firing was a loss. A disruption. Something I'd need to recover from. Now I see it as information. It showed me what my effort was actually buying. It showed me which parts of my identity were tied to usefulness instead of alignment. It forced a recalibration I would have postponed indefinitely if nobody had pushed me. That push didn't feel like a gift at the time. It felt like failure. Most meaningful changes do. I talk to people now who are where I was. Quietly competent. Undercredited. Carrying more than their title suggests. They ask whether they should stay. Whether loyalty will pay off. Whether things will change if they just explain better. I never tell them what to do. I ask them how their work feels when nobody's watching. If it drains them in ways they can't recover from, that's data. If respect only shows up when there's a crisis, that's data too. Pay attention to patterns, not promises. Systems tell the truth eventually. I still believe in commitment. I still believe in seeing things through. But I no longer confuse endurance with virtue. There's a difference between carrying weight and being crushed by it. One builds strength. The other just wears you down. What the job gave me in the end wasn't a title or leverage or even a better salary. It gave me perspective. It showed me that expertise isn't something you defend. It's something you place carefully in environments that know how to use it. And when you finally do that, when you stop proving and start building again, work stops feeling like a test. It starts feeling like what it should have been all along. Contribution. The last message came on a Friday. Late afternoon. That soft hour when offices empty and voices drop, when people say things they wouldn't put in writing. I didn't see it right away. I was still at work, walking the floor, the concrete warm under my shoes from a long day of movement, the air carrying that neutral smell of cardboard and oil that means things are balanced. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I ignored it until the vibration stopped. When I checked it later, there was a voicemail. Bryce. I didn't play it immediately. I stood there for a second, phone in my hand, aware of how different this moment felt from the first time he'd called. No tension in my chest. No spike of curiosity. Just distance. I listened anyway. Not out of hope. Out of closure. His voice was hoarse, stripped of polish. No buzzwords. No framing. Garrett, he said. I know you've probably moved on. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I didn't understand what you did here. I thought it was just spreadsheets. There it was again. The sentence that explained the entire collapse. He paused, and in that pause I could hear him weighing something. If you ever want to consult, he continued, we'll pay whatever you ask. I know I can't undo what happened, but maybe we can work something out. The message ended without confidence. No ask. No expectation. I deleted it. Not dramatically. Just a thumb press and it was gone. Then I blocked the number. I didn't feel victorious. I felt finished. That surprised me. I'd expected satisfaction, maybe even a flicker of vindication, but what settled in instead was clarity. The kind that doesn't need witnesses. Walking away didn't mean I'd won. It meant the contest no longer mattered. I went back to the floor. Shane waved from across the aisle, holding up a clipboard, question already forming on his face. I answered it. We adjusted. Things moved. That's what life looks like when you're where you're supposed to be. It keeps going. Later that night, at home, Stephanie asked if Bryce had called again. I told her he had. And, she asked. I'm done, I said. She nodded once, the way she does when something lands solid. No follow-up questions. We ate dinner together. Normal food. Normal conversation. The kind of evening that doesn't feel like a recovery period. That's when I understood something I hadn't before. Closure doesn't come from apologies. It comes from alignment. Bryce needed me because his system failed without me. Jennifer valued me because her system was built to grow with me. Those are not the same thing. Being needed is a trap if it isn't paired with respect. It keeps you anchored to dysfunction under the illusion of importance. I'd confused the two for years. At my old job, I'd stayed because walking away felt irresponsible. Because people depended on me. Because the work mattered. But work always matters. What changes is whether the environment deserves the effort you're giving it. I didn't walk away with anger. I walked away with standard. Now, when something feels off, I don't rationalize it away. I don't tell myself it's temporary, or that I just need to explain better. I watch patterns. Do people listen before deciding? Do mistakes get addressed early? Does respect show up before urgency? Those signals are hard to fake for long. Sometimes people ask if I regret not negotiating harder when Bryce called. If I should have taken the leverage, named my price, turned the situation into a win on paper. I understand the logic. I just don't agree with it. Leverage without trust is just delay. Eventually, you're right back where you started, only better paid, and more exhausted. I didn't leave empty-handed. I left with something harder to quantify. I left knowing what kind of work I do best. I left knowing what kind of leadership I respond to. I left knowing that my value doesn't increase under pressure. It becomes visible when pressure is absent. That knowledge doesn't disappear with job titles or markets or bosses. It stays. And once you have it, you stop bargaining with situations that ask you to shrink yourself in exchange for stability. You don't need to burn bridges. You don't need speeches or ultimatums. Sometimes the strongest move is simply knowing when the conversation is over. That was mine. The story didn't end with a promotion. It ended with something quieter, something that stayed. Months passed. Not dramatically. Just steadily, the way real time moves when nothing is on fire. Work settled into seasons. Home did too. One evening, I stayed late again. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to walk the floor when it was empty, when the machines softened into a low hum and the building breathed without urgency. That hum matters. It tells you whether things are balanced. I stopped near outbound and listened. No radios overlapping. No rushed footsteps. Just rhythm. That's when it occurred to me how rare that feeling was in my old life. Not the quiet, but the trust behind it. I used to think leadership meant visibility. Meetings. Updates. Being the person everyone checked with before acting. I don't think that anymore. Real leadership disappears when it works. At Midwest Auto, people depended on me because the system depended on me. That felt important. What I didn't see was how fragile that made everything. Here, dependence is spread out. Knowledge moves. Decisions move. If I step away for a day, nothing cracks. That's not a threat to my relevance. It's proof I did my job right. One afternoon, Shane came into my office without knocking. He'd stopped asking permission months ago. I rerouted the Ohio shipments, he said. Storm's coming through tomorrow. Looked like the smarter play. I asked why. He explained it cleanly, calmly, no rush. You good with it? He asked. I nodded. Nice catch. He left smiling, already thinking about the next thing. That moment would have terrified me years ago. Now it felt like relief. I realized then that the real shift hadn't been professional. It was internal. I no longer needed to be the smartest person in the room. I needed to build rooms where smart things happened without me. That's what I walked away with. Perspective that doesn't fade when titles change. I still get messages from people I used to work with. Not complaints. Questions. How do you know when it's time to leave? How do you stop feeling guilty for wanting better? How do you tell if the problem is you or the place? I never give them scripts. I ask them one thing. When things go right at your job, who gets the credit? And when things go wrong, who carries the weight? The answer usually tells them everything. I don't regret the years I spent there. They taught me how systems behave under pressure, how people reveal themselves when incentives shift, how much effort it takes to hold things together quietly. But I don't romanticize it either. Staying too long in a place that benefits from your silence doesn't make you loyal. It makes you convenient. That's a hard truth. It took being fired to see it clearly. Sometimes people ask what I'd do differently if I could go back. I think about that. I would have paid attention sooner to how often respect arrived only during emergencies. I would have noticed how rarely curiosity came from the top. I would have asked myself why stability always seemed to depend on my exhaustion. But hindsight is generous. Life rarely is. What matters more is what you carry forward. I carry a standard now. Not written down. Not negotiable. I work where questions are welcome before problems form. Where effort isn't mistaken for inevitability. Where systems are built to survive people, not trap them. That standard follows me. It will follow me wherever I go next. And that's the real ending. Not applause. Not revenge. Not closure wrapped in a bow. Just clarity. The kind that doesn't fade when the room gets quiet. Here's the part nobody prepares you for. After the noise fades, after the calls stop, after the crisis passes, you don't feel triumphant. You feel normal again. That's what surprised me most. I used to think the end of a story like this came with a moment. A final confrontation. A victory lap. A speech that tied everything together. It doesn't. It comes on a random weekday when nothing is wrong. I noticed it one morning while tying my shoes. No rush. No checklist running in my head. Just the sound of a lace sliding through eyelets and the low murmur of the house waking up. That's when it hit me. I wasn't carrying anyone else's panic anymore. For years, I'd lived in a constant state of readiness. Not stress exactly. Something quieter. Like standing near the edge of a platform, always alert for a train that might come too fast. You get used to that stance. So used to it that you forget it's optional. Losing my job forced me off that platform. At the time, it felt like falling. Looking back, it was the first moment I stood flat on the ground again. I still think about Midwest Auto sometimes. Not with bitterness. With distance. I wonder how many people are still there doing the same thing I did. Keeping systems alive quietly. Absorbing friction so leadership doesn't have to see it. I know what that feels like. You tell yourself it's temporary. That once things stabilize, once the next quarter passes, once the new manager settles in, you'll finally breathe. The truth is, if your breathing depends on someone else changing, you'll be waiting a long time. That realization didn't come from anger. It came from contrast. Working somewhere healthy doesn't feel exciting all the time. It feels steady, predictable in the best way. Problems still happen. Deadlines still matter. But they don't follow you home like static clinging to your clothes. I didn't understand how much of myself I'd given away until I got it back. Not in a dramatic sense. In small, practical ways. I listen better now. Not because I'm trying harder, but because my mind isn't already full. I say no earlier. Not defensively. Clearly. I trust people faster. Not blindly. Deliberately. Those changes didn't come from a book or a workshop. They came from being pushed out of a situation that depended on me staying small and quiet. That's the uncomfortable part people don't like to admit. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is the only thing that could have moved you. If Bryce hadn't fired me, I'd probably still be there. Still fixing. Still covering. Still telling myself it was just how responsibility felt. I wouldn't have been miserable. I would have been numb. That's harder to recognize. Now, when people ask what the lesson is, I hesitate. Not because I don't know it. Because lessons sound cleaner than real life. But if I had to say it plainly, I'd say this. Pay attention to where your effort goes unnoticed. Not unpraised. Unnoticed. Praise can be inconsistent. Attention isn't. If the only time people see your value is when something breaks, that's not appreciation. That's dependency. And dependency without respect always costs more than it pays. I don't regret the years I gave. They made me good at what I do. I regret only that I didn't question sooner why being indispensable require me to be invisible. That won't happen again. Not because I'm more guarded. Because I'm more aware. Awareness changes the way you move through rooms. The way you accept work. The way you decide what deserves your energy. My story doesn't end with revenge or redemption. It ends with alignment. With work that fits. With leadership that listens. With systems that don't collapse when one person steps away. That's the ending most people never see. Because it's quiet. Because it looks ordinary. But once you've lived on both sides, ordinary peace is worth more than extraordinary validation. And that's something nobody can take away from you once you've earned it. There's one last thing I didn't understand until much later. It didn't come from work. It came from what stopped happening once work stopped hurting. Nobody warned me about the silence afterward. Not the peaceful kind. The reflective kind. The kind where you replay moments that didn't seem important at the time and realize they were teaching you something you weren't ready to hear. I thought back to that first meeting with Bryce. The smile. The tone. The way he talked past me instead of to me. At the time, I focused on the outcome. The firing. Now I see the signal I missed. He never asked a question. Not one real one. No curiosity about how things worked. No interest in why decisions had been made a certain way. No pause that said, maybe there's something here I don't understand yet. I used to excuse that. I told myself leaders were busy. That curiosity was optional when results were good. That explanation felt reasonable while I was benefiting from staying quiet. It wasn't true. Curiosity is the first form of respect, and the absence of it is the first warning sign. Once I noticed that, I started seeing it everywhere. Not just in bosses. In rooms. In cultures. In myself. At my new job, curiosity showed up constantly. People asked before deciding. They checked assumptions. They admitted gaps without embarrassment. That didn't slow things down. It prevented the wrong speed. I realized then that I'd spent years compensating for a lack of curiosity above me. I'd been filling in blanks nobody wanted to acknowledge existed, making decisions quietly so others could stay confident. That's not leadership. That's containment. And containment always leaks eventually. Another thing became clear too. I'd confused being calm with being okay. I prided myself on staying composed, on not reacting, on absorbing tension without passing it on. That skill served me well. Until it didn't. Because calm can become a mask. One you wear so long you forget what is hiding. When I left, people said I handled it well. They weren't wrong. What they didn't see was how much I'd trained myself not to notice discomfort until it became background noise. That's dangerous. Discomfort is data. It's the earliest signal something's off. At my new job, discomfort still shows up, but doesn't get buried. If something feels wrong, we talk about it while it's small. Before it hardens into policy. Before it becomes just how things are done here. That shift alone has probably saved years of friction. I also learned something uncomfortable about loyalty. Not the word. The practice. Loyalty isn't about staying no matter what. It's about mutual protection. At Midwest Auto, my loyalty was one-directional. I protected the system. I protected the people below me. I protected leadership from consequences. When the moment came, nobody protected me. That doesn't make them villains. It makes the arrangement clear. Loyalty without reciprocity isn't loyalty. It's sacrifice. And sacrifice should never be assumed. I don't say that with bitterness. I say it with precision. Precision matters now. I choose environments more carefully. I watch how leaders respond when someone challenges them politely. I notice who gets defensive and who gets curious. Those reactions tell you everything you need to know about the future. If curiosity is punished, silence becomes survival. If silence becomes survival, trust never forms. And without trust, systems rot from inside. That's the cycle I escaped without knowing it existed. The last thing I learned is this. You don't leave jobs. You leave patterns. Once you see the pattern, staying becomes harder than leaving. That's why firing me worked out the way it did. It didn't just remove me from a role. It broke the pattern I'd been tolerating. I didn't walk away smarter. I walked away clearer. Clear about what questions matter. Clear about what behaviors predict the future. Clear about what I'm willing to carry and what I'm not. That clarity didn't come from success. It came from contrast. And contrast, as it turns out, is one of the most honest teachers there is. That's the last thing this story gave me. Not closure. Not revenge. Not validation. Vision. And once you have that, you don't go back to working in the dark.